On a cold February morning in 2004, in the small town of Princeton, Illinois, a young woman left her apartment to start what should have been an ordinary day. She never came home. Her name was Jennifer Smith, 23 years old, a nursing student with dark hair and a quiet smile that those who knew her said could light up a room. By nightfall, her car sat abandoned in a gravel lot 3 miles from her home, keys still in the ignition, her textbooks scattered across the passenger seat. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, no answers. For 16 years her family waited. The investigators who worked her case carried her file like a weight they could not set down, and the person responsible walked free, hidden in plain sight, protected by silence and the passage of time. What happened to Jennifer Smith that February morning, and why did it take nearly 2 decades for the truth to finally surface? The town of Princeton sits in Bureau County, roughly 100 miles southwest of Chicago, where the Illinois prairie stretches flat and endless under enormous skis. Population just over 7,000. The kind of place where people know their neighbors, where the high school football games draw crowds on Friday nights, where the main street still has a hardware store that's been family-owned for 3 generations. In 2004, it was a town that prided itself on safety, on being the sort of community where children rode bicycles without supervision and front doors remained unlocked after dark. Jennifer Smith had grown up 30 miles away in a smaller town called Walnut, but she moved to Princeton in the fall of 2003 to attend nursing school at the community college. She rented a small apartment above a pharmacy on Main Street, a 1-bedroom with creaking floors and a window that overlooked the street below. Her landlord, an elderly man named Harold Green, later told investigators that Jennifer was the ideal tenant: quiet, responsible, always paid rent on time. She kept odd hours because of her clinical rotations at the hospital, sometimes leaving before dawn, sometimes returning after midnight, but she never caused trouble. Those who knew her said Jennifer was reserved, almost shy, but deeply determined. She had wanted to be a nurse since childhood, inspired by the woman who cared for her grandmother during a long illness. She worked part-time at a diner called Murphy's on Route 6, taking the evening shift 3 nights a week to help pay for school. Her coworkers remembered her as someone who listened more than she spoke, who wrote reminders to herself on the backs of order tickets, who always asked customers how they were doing and actually waited for the answer. February 3, 2004, fell on a Tuesday. The temperature hovered around 18 degrees before sunrise, the kind of cold that makes breath hang visible in the air, that stings exposed skin within seconds. Jennifer had an early clinical rotation scheduled at the Princeton Hospital, starting at 6 in the morning. Her alarm went off at 4:45. The apartment manager in the building next door, a woman named Margaret Howell, later told investigators she heard Jennifer's footsteps crossing the floor above the pharmacy around 5 o'clock. She knew the sound of Jennifer's routine: the creak of the bathroom door, water running, the shuffle of movement in the small kitchen. At 5:32, according to the timestamp on the security camera at the gas station 2 blocks away, Jennifer's car passed by heading north on Main Street. She drove a 1998 Honda Civic, forest green, with a small dent in the rear bumper from where she had backed into a post during her first week in town. The car was distinctive because of a bumper sticker on the back window that read, "Future Nurse," in blue letters. Multiple witnesses saw that car driving through town that morning. A mail carrier remembered seeing it turn onto Highway 26. A farmer hauling equipment saw it heading north just after dawn, but no one saw Jennifer. At 6:15, the nursing supervisor at Princeton Hospital marked Jennifer as absent. She did not call. She did not show up. This was unusual. Jennifer had never missed a clinical rotation without notice. The supervisor tried calling her apartment. No answer. She called Jennifer's cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. At 8:47 that morning, a man named Robert Chen pulled into the parking lot of an abandoned grain elevator on County Road 2300 North, roughly 3 miles outside Princeton. He was a real estate developer looking at the property for potential purchase. He noticed the green Honda immediately because it was the only vehicle in the lot, sitting at an odd angle near the fence line, as though it had been parked in a hurry. He walked over to investigate. The keys hung from the ignition. The engine was cold. The driver's door was unlocked. On the passenger seat lay 2 textbooks, a spiral notebook, and a travel mug of coffee, still half full. Jennifer's purse sat on the floor. Her wallet was inside, containing her driver's license, $23 in cash, and 2 credit cards. Her cell phone was missing. Robert Chen called the Princeton Police Department at 8:51. The first officer arrived at 9:03. Deputy Michael Torres stepped out of his patrol car and approached the Honda cautiously, already sensing that something was terribly wrong. He looked inside without touching anything. The coffee in the travel mug was cold but not frozen, suggesting it had been poured that morning. The notebook lay open to a page of handwritten notes about patient assessment protocols. Everything looked ordinary, except for the fact that Jennifer Smith was nowhere to be found. Clear's throat. The search began within hours. By noon on February 3rd, Princeton police had contacted the Bureau County Sheriff's Office and requested assistance. By 2 in the afternoon, the Illinois State Police had been notified. Jennifer's parents, Robert and Susan Smith, drove from Walnut in a state of mounting terror, arriving in Princeton just before 3. Susan Smith would later describe that drive as the longest 40 minutes of her life, every possible scenario playing through her mind, none of them ending well. The initial search focused on the area surrounding the grain elevator. Deputies walked the fields in grid patterns, looking for any sign of Jennifer or evidence of what might have happened. The ground was frozen solid, covered in patches of old snow. Volunteers from the community began arriving as word spread. By nightfall, nearly 200 people had joined the search, carrying flashlights, calling Jennifer's name into the darkness. The temperature dropped to 12 degrees. The wind picked up, carrying voices away across the empty fields. Investigators examined Jennifer's car with meticulous care. They dusted for fingerprints and found only Jennifer's own prints on the steering wheel, door handles, and dashboard. They searched the trunk and found nothing unusual: a spare tire, a winter emergency kit, a box of textbooks from the previous semester. They noted the odometer reading, 73,412 miles. They photographed everything: the position of the seat, the angle of the rearview mirror, the radio, still tuned to the local country station. The lead investigator, Detective Sarah Brennan from the Bureau County Sheriff's Office, arrived at the scene at 4:30 that afternoon. She had worked missing persons cases before, too many of them, and she recognized the patterns that separated the cases that ended well from those that did not. The abandoned car, the personal belongings left behind, the isolated location. None of it suggested that Jennifer had left voluntarily. Detective Brennan began building a timeline. Jennifer left her apartment at approximately 5:30. The hospital was a 12-minute drive from her apartment, straight down Main Street and then west on Highway 6. But the grain elevator where her car was found sat 3 miles in the opposite direction, north of town on a road that led nowhere Jennifer needed to go. Why would she drive there? Had she been meeting someone? Had she been forced off the road? Had she gotten lost? Those who knew Jennifer said she was directionally challenged, that she sometimes took wrong turns, but the route to the hospital was one she had driven dozens of times. She knew the way. And if she had gotten lost, why would she park at an abandoned grain elevator? Why would she leave her keys in the ignition? Why would she walk away from her car in 18-degree weather without her purse, without her phone, without her coat? Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the possibilities. Abduction seemed most likely, but there were no signs of struggle in or around the car. No broken glass, no torn clothing, no blood. The crime scene technicians processed everything but found nothing that provided answers. The silence of the evidence was itself a kind of evidence, suggesting that whatever happened had happened quickly, without violence visible to the naked eye, or had happened somewhere else entirely. By the third day, the search had expanded to cover a radius of 15 miles. Helicopters flew overhead with thermal imaging equipment. Dive teams checked the creeks and retention ponds in the area, breaking through ice to peer into the murky water below. Volunteers continued walking the fields and checking abandoned buildings. Local television stations ran Jennifer's photograph constantly. The Princeton Police Department set up a tip line. Calls came in steadily. Someone thought they saw a young woman matching Jennifer's description at a rest stop near Interstate 80. Someone else reported a suspicious vehicle near the grain elevator on the morning of February 3rd. Each lead was investigated. Each lead turned into nothing. Jennifer's parents held a press conference on February 6th, 4 days after their daughter vanished. Susan Smith stood at a podium in the Princeton Police Department, her husband beside her, and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. She described Jennifer as a loving daughter, a dedicated student, someone who called home every Sunday evening without fail. Her voice broke when she said, Jennifer would never just leave. If she could come home, she would. Please, if anyone knows anything, please help us bring her home. The community responded with an outpouring of support. Local businesses printed flyers, churches held prayer vigils. A reward fund was established, eventually reaching $15,000. But as the days turned into weeks, the initial urgency began to fade. The volunteers stopped coming. The news crews packed up their equipment and moved on to other stories. The search operation scaled back. By March, only a handful of investigators remained actively working Jennifer's case. Detective Brennan refused to let it go. She interviewed everyone who had seen Jennifer in the days before her disappearance. Her professors at the nursing school said Jennifer had been focused and engaged in class, showing no signs of distress. Her coworkers at Murphy's Diner said she had worked her shift on the evening of February 2nd and seemed completely normal. Her landlord said he heard her walking around her apartment that night, the television playing softly through the thin walls. Everything pointed to a young woman living her ordinary life, right up until the moment she vanished. The investigation turned its attention to Jennifer's personal relationships. She had a boyfriend, a man named Tyler Morrison, who lived in Walnut. They had been dating since high school, one of those steady, comfortable relationships that everyone assumed would end in marriage. Tyler told investigators he had spoken to Jennifer on the phone on February 2nd, around 9 in the evening. They talked about plans for the upcoming weekend. She sounded fine, he said, happy, looking forward to seeing him. He had an alibi for the morning of February 3rd. He was at work at a manufacturing plant in Walnut, clocked in at 6, confirmed by his supervisor and security footage. Investigators looked at Jennifer's finances. No unusual transactions, no large withdrawals. Her bank account showed the normal pattern of a college student living on a tight budget. Her credit cards had not been used since February 2nd, when she bought gas at a station in Princeton. Her cell phone records showed the last call she made was to her mother on February 1st. The last text message she sent was to a classmate, confirming the time of their clinical rotation. The phone went silent after 5:30 on the morning of February 3rd, and never pinged another cell tower. Clears throat. For those who have ever watched a missing person case unfold, There is a particular agony in the waiting, the not knowing, the suspension between hope and despair. Jennifer's parents existed in that space for weeks, then months. They could not grieve because they did not know for certain what had happened. They could not move forward because Jennifer might still be out there somewhere needing them. They hung missing person flyers in every town within 100 miles. They drove the roads around Princeton, looking for anything the searchers might have missed. They called the Princeton Police Department every day, asking if there were any updates. Usually there were not. As spring arrived and the snow melted, volunteers organized additional searches of the areas that had been inaccessible during winter. They found nothing. Summer came. The fields around Princeton turned green and then golden. The grain elevator where Jennifer's car had been found stood empty and silent, slowly deteriorating under the weight of time and weather. By fall, the active investigation had essentially stopped. The case remained open, but with no new leads and no evidence. There was nowhere left to look. In November 2004, 9 months after Jennifer disappeared, Detective Brennan received a call from a woman named Linda Patterson who lived in a farmhouse about half a mile from the grain elevator. She had called the tip line back in February, but said no one had ever followed up. She wanted to report something she had seen on the morning of February 3rd. Around 6 in the morning, she had been letting her dog out when she noticed headlights in the distance, near the grain elevator. She saw 2 vehicles. One looked like it might have been a small car. The other was larger, possibly a truck. She watched for a few minutes and saw someone moving between the vehicles, but she was too far away to see clearly. She went back inside to make coffee, and when she looked again a few minutes later, one of the vehicles was gone. Detective Brennan drove to Linda Patterson's farmhouse to take a statement. She asked why Mrs. Patterson had not called immediately when she heard about Jennifer's disappearance. Mrs. Patterson said she had called on February 4th, but the tip line was overwhelmed, and she left a message that apparently was never returned. She assumed investigators had already figured out what she saw. She did not realize until she saw a news story about the case still being unsolved that her information might be important. This revelation suggested that Jennifer might have been meeting someone at the grain elevator or that someone had followed her there. But who? And why? Investigators revisited the case with this new information, but without being able to identify the second vehicle or the person Mrs. Patterson had seen, it led nowhere. The case went cold again. 2 years passed, then 3, then 5. Jennifer's parents aged in the particular way that grief ages people, their faces carrying a permanent shadow of loss. They established a scholarship in Jennifer's name for nursing students. They attended conferences for families of missing persons. They never stopped hopping, but the hope became quieter, more private, tempered by the weight of time. Susan Smith told a reporter in 2009 that she still set a place for Jennifer at the table during holidays, just in case. Just in case this was the year her daughter came home. In 2010, 6 years after Jennifer vanished, Robert and Susan Smith made the difficult decision to hold a memorial service. Not a funeral because there was no body, but a gathering to remember their daughter and to acknowledge that she was most likely gone. Over 200 people attended. Jennifer's nursing school classmates spoke about her kindness. Her professors remembered her dedication. Tyler Morrison, who had since married someone else, stood in the back and wept. Detective Brennan attended in plain clothes, watching, still hoping that someone might say something, anything that would break the case open. No one did. The years accumulated like layers of sediment, each one burying Jennifer's case a little deeper. By 2015, many people in Princeton had nearly forgotten about the nursing student who disappeared one cold February morning. The grain elevator was demolished in 2012, replaced by a new agricultural facility. The pharmacy where Jennifer had rented her apartment closed, the building converted into office space. Tyler Morrison had 2 children and rarely spoke about Jennifer anymore. Life moved forward, as it always does, leaving the unsolved and the vanished behind. But Detective Brennan never forgot. Even after she retired from the Bureau County Sheriff's Office in 2016, she kept a copy of Jennifer's case file at home. She reviewed it periodically, looking for something she might have missed, some connection she had failed to make. She had worked dozens of cases over her career, but Jennifer's was the one that haunted her, the one that felt perpetually unfinished. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the creeping suspicion that something is not right, that the person you think you know might be hiding something dark beneath the surface, you understand the particular horror of what came next. Because in 2019, 15 years after Jennifer Smith vanished, a woman named Rachel Morrison walked into the Princeton Police Department with a story that would finally provide answers. And those answers were far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Rachel Morrison was Tyler Morrison's wife. They had been married for 8 years. They had 2 daughters ages 6 and 4. By all outward appearances, they had a good life. Tyler worked as a shift supervisor at the same manufacturing plant where he had worked since high school. Rachel was a teacher at the elementary school in Walnut. They lived in a modest house with a fenced yard and a swing set. Neighbors described them as a normal family, quiet, kept to themselves, no obvious problems. But Rachel had been noticing things, small things at first. The way Tyler would go silent whenever Jennifer's name was mentioned. The nightmares he had, waking up in the middle of the night, covered in sweat, refusing to talk about what he had dreamed. The locked drawer in his desk that he said contained old work documents. The trips he took alone, once or twice a year, driving somewhere he never quite explained. She had dismissed these things for years, telling herself that everyone had secrets, that Tyler's relationship with Jennifer had ended badly, and of course he would be affected by her disappearance. But in early 2019, something changed. Their older daughter, Emily, started having nightmares. She would wake up crying, saying she heard voices, that someone was calling for help. The pediatrician said it was normal, that children often went through phases of bad dreams. But Rachel noticed that Emily's nightmares seemed to intensify after she spent time with Tyler. One evening, in September 2019, Rachel overheard Emily talking to her younger sister about a secret Daddy had told her. A secret about someone who went to sleep and never woke up. Rachel confronted Tyler that night. She asked him what he had told Emily. Tyler became defensive, said it was nothing, that Rachel was overreacting. But Rachel pressed. She had lived with unspoken tension for 15 years, and something inside her finally broke. She demanded to know what secret Emily was talking about. She demanded to know why he still had nightmares about Jennifer. She demanded the truth. Tyler walked out of the house. He got in his truck and drove away. Rachel did not see him for 3 days. When he finally came home, he was different, quieter, hollow. He looked like a man who had been carrying an enormous weight and finally realized he could no longer bear it. He asked Rachel to sit down. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he told her what happened on February 3, 2004. Clears throat. Rachel Morrison sat in the interview room at the Princeton Police Department on September 27, 2019, and repeated to investigators what her husband had confessed to her. Her voice shook, but she spoke clearly, understanding that she was dismantling her entire life with every word. Detective James Chen, who had taken over Jennifer's cold case when Detective Brennan retired, recorded every word. Tyler Morrison and Jennifer Smith had not broken up cleanly, Rachel explained. According to Tyler's confession, Jennifer had ended the relationship in January 2004, roughly a month before she disappeared. She told Tyler she needed to focus on nursing school, that the distance between them was too difficult. Tyler did not accept this. He called her constantly. He drove to Princeton to see her, showing up at her apartment unannounced. Jennifer's roommate from that time, who investigators had interviewed back in 2004, had mentioned that Jennifer seemed stressed about an ex-boyfriend, but she had not provided details and investigators had not pushed further, satisfied with Tyler's alibi. On the evening of February 2nd, Tyler called Jennifer and begged her to meet him the following morning. He said he wanted to talk, to get closure, to say goodbye properly. Jennifer reluctantly agreed. She told him she had to be at the hospital by 6, but she could meet him briefly before that. Tyler suggested the grain elevator on County Road 2300 North because it was private and on Jennifer's route to the hospital, though this was not true. The grain elevator was miles off her route. Jennifer, trusting the man she had dated for years, agreed. Tyler drove to Princeton early on the morning of February 3rd. He arrived at the grain elevator at 5:45. Jennifer pulled in shortly after. According to Tyler's confession to Rachel, Jennifer got out of her car and walked over to his truck. They talked through his truck window for a few minutes. She told him again that the relationship was over. She was kind about it, Tyler said, but firm. She needed to move on. He needed to move on. Tyler said something inside him snapped. Years of planning a future with Jennifer, years of assuming they would marry and build a life together, all of it collapsing in that moment. He got out of the truck. They argued. Jennifer turned to walk back to her car. Tyler grabbed her arm. She pulled away. He grabbed her again, harder this time. And then in a moment he said he could not fully remember, could not fully explain. His hands were around her throat. Jennifer fought. She clawed at his arms. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Tyler was larger, stronger. The struggle lasted less than a minute. When it was over, Jennifer lay motionless on the frozen ground. Tyler said he stood there for a long time, not fully comprehending what he had done. Then panic set in. He had to hide what happened. He had to make Jennifer disappear. Tyler loaded Jennifer's body into the bed of his truck and covered it with a tarp. He moved her car closer to the grain elevator's fence line to make it look like it had been parked there intentionally. He left her keys in the ignition, her belongings inside. Hopping investigators would think she had met with foul play from a stranger. Then he drove. He drove southeast, toward a remote area near the Hennepin Canal, a waterway that runs through Bureau and Henry counties. He found a section where the banks were steep and overgrown with brush. He carried Jennifer's body down to the water's edge and weighted it down with rocks and cinder blocks he had in the truck bed, materials he used for landscaping projects. He pushed her body into the canal. The water was murky and cold. He watched until it sank beneath the surface. Then he drove back to Walnut, arriving at the manufacturing plant at 6:02, clocking in for his shift as though nothing had happened. Rachel Morrison finished telling investigators her husband's confession and then broke down completely. She said she felt like she did not know the man she had married. She said she thought about Jennifer's parents, about the 15 years they had spent not knowing. She said she could not sleep in the same house as Tyler anymore, could not look at him without seeing a stranger. She provided investigators with one more crucial detail. Tyler had told her where, specifically, he had disposed of Jennifer's body. A section of the Hennepin Canal near mile marker 14, where an old maintenance bridge crossed the water. The arrest happened with swift precision. On September 30th, 2019, Tyler Morrison was taken into custody at his workplace. Officers read him his rights in front of his coworkers, who stood in stunned silence. Tyler did not resist. He did not speak. He simply stared straight ahead as they placed handcuffs on his wrists and led him to the patrol car. Local news crews arrived within the hour. their cameras capturing footage of the man who had hidden in plain sight for 15 years, who had attended Jennifer's memorial service and cried crocodile tears, who had built a family and a life while Jennifer lay at the bottom of a canal. The search for Jennifer's remains began immediately. Dive teams from the Illinois State Police descended on the Hennepin Canal near mile marker 14. The water was deeper than expected, visibility nearly zero. They worked for 3 days, using sonar equipment and methodically searching the canal bed. On October 3, 2019, divers located skeletal remains tangled in the roots of a submerged tree, weighted down with rocks and deteriorated cinder blocks, exactly where Tyler said they would be. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Jennifer Smith. After 15 years and 8 months, she was finally found, finally coming home. The media coverage was overwhelming. Princeton, a town that had largely forgotten about Jennifer Smith, suddenly found itself at the center of a national story. Tyler Morrison's photograph appeared on every news channel. Reporters interviewed anyone who had known him, searching for signs they might have missed, warning signals that had gone unnoticed. But those who knew him said Tyler had seemed normal, perhaps quieter than most, perhaps a bit controlling in relationships. But nothing that suggested he was capable of taking a life. The community reacted with shock and horror. Vigils were held. Jennifer's photograph appeared in windows throughout Princeton and Walnut. Her parents, now in their late 60s, released a statement through their lawyer. They thanked the investigators who never gave up. They thanked Rachel Morrison for her courage in coming forward. They said that while nothing could bring Jennifer back, knowing what happened provided a measure of peace they had not felt in 15 years. Tyler Morrison was charged with first-degree murder. His attorney entered a plea of not guilty, suggesting the confession to Rachel was coerced or misunderstood. But the evidence was overwhelming. The location of the remains matched Tyler's confession exactly. Forensic analysis of the rocks and cinder blocks found with Jennifer's body matched materials from Tyler's property. Cell phone records from 2004, re-examined with new technology, showed that Tyler's phone had pinged a tower near the grain elevator at approximately 6 in the morning on February 3rd, despite his claim that he had driven directly to work. The trial began in March 2020, though it was delayed several times due to the pandemic. Rachel Morrison testified against her husband, her voice steady, her testimony devastating. She described Tyler's confession in detail. She described the years of nightmares and strange behavior. She described the moment she realized the man she married was responsible for Jennifer's death. Defense attorneys tried to discredit her, suggesting she was angry about the marriage failing and fabricating the confession, but the physical evidence supported every detail of her account. Tyler Morrison never took the stand. He sat silent throughout the trial, his expression blank, as witness after witness testified against him. Jennifer's parents attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row, watching the man who had taken their daughter from them. Tyler never looked at them, not once. On June 19, 2020, the jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, concealment of a homicide. Tyler Morrison showed no reaction when the verdict was read. Jennifer's mother wept quietly. Her father sat stone-faced, gripping his wife's hand. At sentencing, the judge addressed Tyler directly. "You took a vibrant young woman with her entire life ahead of her and extinguished her future because you could not accept that she had the right to choose her own path. You hid what you did for 15 years, allowing Jennifer's family to suffer in uncertainty while you built a life you did not deserve. The law allows me to impose a sentence that reflects the gravity of your actions." Tyler Morrison was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, still silent, still expressionless. He currently sits in an Illinois correctional facility where he will remain for the rest of his life. Jennifer Smith's remains were laid to rest in a cemetery in Walnut on a clear day in late October 2020. Hundreds attended the funeral. Her tombstone, a simple gray granite marker, bears her name, her dates, and a single line: "Beloved daughter, dedicated healer, never forgotten." The case of Jennifer Smith is a reminder that justice, though delayed, can still arrive. That the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing. That the people who love us never stop searching, never stop hopping, never stop fighting for answers. Jennifer's story did not end the way anyone wanted, but it ended with truth, with accountability, with a measure of closure that her family carried in their hearts like a fragile flame. For those who have ever wondered if their voice matters, if coming forward with information could make a difference, Rachel Morrison's courage provides an answer. She chose truth over comfort. She chose justice over denial. And because of that choice, Jennifer Smith could finally rest, and a man who thought he could hide forever now faces the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.